The text message lit up Omi's phone while she was setting the table with trembling hands. It was supposed to be their anniversary dinner, candles flickering, her favorite stew simmering in the pot, her heart waiting for her husband. But instead of, "I'm on my way," or even "I love you," the word stabbed her chest like a knife. "Thanks for nothing." Her breath caught. Tears blurred her eyes. She wasn't just a wife. She was also the silent backbone of his company, the unseen engine of his empire. For years Omi had built him up, handled his clients, cleaned up his mistakes, stood in the shadows while he shined. And this was what she got? That night she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply began to write her own goodbye, a resignation letter that would change both their lives forever. Omi woke up early that morning with excitement in her heart. It was their wedding anniversary, and she wanted the evening to be special. She spent hours ironing her best wrapper, smoothing every crease with care. Then she moved to the kitchen, where she cooked Byru's favorite meal, soft pounded yam with a rich steaming soup that filled the house with a warm smell. As she stirred the pot, she rehearsed the words she wanted to say to him later that night. She had planned to tell him how proud she was of his success, how much she still believed in their love despite the long nights he spent at work. By evening the house looked beautiful. She set the table with candles and placed the food neatly, waiting for him to walk through the door. Each minute felt longer, but she kept smiling, hoping he was on his way. She checked her phone again and again, expecting to see a message like, "I'm almost home," or, "I can't wait to see you." Finally her phone lit up. Her heart jumped, but the words on the screen froze her in place. "Thanks for nothing." Just 3 words. No explanation. No love. No kindness. Her hands trembled and her chest felt heavy. She stared at the message again, wondering if she had read it wrong. But the meaning was clear. The candles kept burning, the food stayed untouched, and the speech she had practiced all day melted away with her tears. She sat at the table in silence, the meal turning cold before her. In that quiet moment, something broke inside her. She had always believed she was a partner in this marriage, that her love and sacrifices mattered. But now she could see the truth. In his eyes she was invisible. Omi didn't scream or cry loudly. She simply sat there, letting the weight of those words sink in. And as the night passed, another feeling began to grow in her heart. Not just sadness, but a fire she had never felt before. It was the beginning of a new strength, the first step of realizing that maybe she had been giving everything to a man who no longer saw her at all. That night, the anniversary she had dreamed of never happened. But something else did. Omi began to see herself clearly for the first time, not as Byru's shadow, not as the woman waiting in silence, but as someone who deserved more than a cold message and an empty chair. The next morning, Omi dressed quietly and walked into Byru's office. She didn't walk in as a wife coming to see her husband, but as a woman who knew how much of herself she had poured into that place. Every wall, every file, every deal carried a piece of her sacrifice. She remembered the endless nights when Byru would fall asleep while she stayed awake, writing proposals and correcting reports, making sure no mistake would ruin a deal. She thought of the times she had spoken gently to angry clients, convincing them to stay when they were ready to walk away. She had never been on the company's payroll, yet she had worked harder than most of the employees. There were so many days she skipped her own rest, her own plans, just to make sure Byru's dream survived. She told herself it was their dream, something they were building together for the future of their family. That belief kept her moving, even when she was tired, even when her efforts were ignored. She remembered how Byru would boast to friends about how fast his company was growing. He stood proudly in front of them, smiling as if he alone had carried the weight. And she stayed silent, clapping for him, never reminding him of the late nights she had carried those files on her back or the times she had begged a client to give him one more chance. The truth hit her harder that morning than ever before. It had never been their dream. It was always his, and she had been nothing more than the silent worker in the background. She had been the invisible hand that fixed his mistakes, the unseen voice that smoothed his roughness with clients, the shadow that allowed his light to shine. He had built an empire, but he had done it on her shoulders. And not once did he stop to say, "This is ours." Omi stood in that office, looking around at the company she had given so much to. The polished desks, the ringing phones, the confident staff walking up and down, they all reminded her of the years she had sacrificed. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, Not because she regretted giving, but because she now understood how little he valued it. In his eyes, she was not a partner, not a builder, only someone who stood quietly in the shadows while he took the applause. That morning, as she turned to leave his office, her steps were slower, heavier, but her heart was clearer. She was done being invisible. She was done giving everything for nothing. For the first time, Omi realized she was not just the helper behind his empire. She was the backbone that kept it standing, and without her, the whole thing would one day collapse. For months, Omi had been living with questions she tried to bury deep inside. She remembered the first time she heard a woman's laughter through Byru's phone, when he thought she wasn't listening. It was light, playful, and far too familiar to be a client. When she asked who it was, he brushed it off with a quick answer saying it was business. She wanted to believe him, so she stayed silent. Then came the perfume, a strange scent that clung to his shirts whenever he returned home late. It wasn't hers. It was sweet, heavy, the kind of fragrance that didn't disappear easily. She would fold the shirts with trembling hands, telling herself not to think too much. He was her husband and she was supposed to trust him. That was what a loyal wife did, wasn't it? She convinced herself that questioning him would only push him further away. The excuses grew too frequent to ignore. Meetings that stretched into the night. Sudden trips that appeared without warning. Promises to be home for dinner that turned into empty chairs and cold meals. Omi held on, hoping each time that he would remember her. Remember their vows. Remember that she was waiting. She gave him the benefit of the doubt again and again, even when her heart whispered the truth she didn't want to hear. But after that anniversary night, after seeing those 3 cruel words on her phone, "Thanks for nothing," everything clicked into place. She could no longer pretend. She could no longer protect herself with excuses. The laughter, the perfume, the late nights, they weren't random. They were pieces of a puzzle she had been too afraid to complete. Her hands shook as she thought about it. She had been sitting at the table, cooking his favorite meals, ironing his clothes, supporting his company, carrying his dreams, while he was out there laughing with someone else. He had already begun to replace her in his life, little by little, without even telling her. And now, with that message, he had thrown away whatever was left between them. The realization cut her deeply. She had never seen herself as perfect, but she had always been faithful, always been present, always chosen to believe in him when others doubted. Yet in his eyes, she was no longer the partner she thought she was. She wasn't even someone he respected. She was simply in the way, an obstacle he had already pushed aside in his new story. Omi sat quietly, letting the truth settle like a stone in her chest. Betrayal didn't always come with a loud confession. Sometimes it came slowly, hidden in small lies, covered in sweet words, until it finally revealed itself with cold cruelty. And now she understood. Byru had already left her in his heart long before she read that message. She had been holding on to a man who had let go of her long ago. That night, Omi sat at the small wooden desk in their bedroom. The house was quiet, but her mind was louder than ever. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank page for a long time. Her hands hesitated on the keyboard, but slowly they began to move. Each word she typed felt like cutting a rope she had been tied with for years. She wrote with calm but steady fingers. "I resign, effective immediately. This company is no longer my burden to carry. Consider this my final gift to you. Freedom from the woman you said gave you nothing." She paused and read the words again. They didn't shake. They didn't beg. They stood firm, just like she had finally decided to stand. For so long, she had hidden her pain behind silence. She had worked without recognition, loved without being loved back, given without receiving. But this letter was different. It wasn't for him to understand her worth. It was for her to reclaim her own. She pressed the print button, and the machine hummed softly, sliding out the paper. She took it carefully, folded it into 3 neat parts, and placed it in a plain white envelope. She looked down at her hand, at the ring that had once meant promises of forever, of partnership, of love. Slowly, she slid it off her finger. It felt heavy even as it left her skin. She placed it inside the envelope with the letter. There were no stains of tears on the paper, no angry scribbles in the margins. Omi didn't write paragraphs of explanation or fill the page with memories. She didn't remind him of the nights she stayed up working, the times she defended him, the years she carried his dream as if it were hers. She didn't need to. He already knew, and if he chose to forget, Then this letter was not meant to remind him. It was meant to close the door. She sealed the envelope and placed it gently on his desk, right where he would see it in the morning. She stood for a moment looking at it, her heart beating slowly but steadily. This was the end of her silence. This was her voice, sharp and clear, written on a single sheet of paper. When she turned away from the desk, she felt a strange calmness. Not joy, not relief, but a kind of strength she had never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for him to come home, wasn't waiting for an apology, wasn't waiting for recognition. She had given all of that up with one letter and one ring. That night, Omi lay down on the bed, not as a wife still hoping for love, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself. The silence in the room was heavy, but it no longer scared her. The letter had spoken for her, and in its sharp truth, she had finally found her freedom. The morning started like any other for Byru. He walked into the office with his usual confident stride, greeting no one, heading straight for his desk. But the moment his eyes fell on the white envelope sitting neatly on the polished surface, his steps slowed. He reached for it, curious, not expecting what lay inside. As he opened it and read the words, his face drained of color. The letter was short, sharp, and final. Omi had resigned, not only from the company but from carrying his burden. And with it, she had left her wedding ring, the circle of promises now broken. Byru sank into his chair, staring at the letter, reading it again and again as if the words might change. But they didn't. They cut the same way each time. For a moment he sat in silence, but the sound outside his office told him the world was already shifting. The staff, who had always looked up to Omi, were whispering in corners. They had noticed her absence, and their unease spread quickly. Within hours, the weight of her absence showed. Invoices piled on desks, waiting for her steady hands to sort them. Calls came in from clients, their voices sharp, asking why Omi had not responded. She was the one they trusted, the one they believed in. Contracts that should have been signed slipped away, because without her the company looked unstable. Byru slammed his fist on the desk and stormed out into the hall. His voice thundered as he called for Omi, demanding to know where she was, but the silence that followed was louder than his anger. She wasn't there. She hadn't come. And everyone knew it. He walked from one end of the office to the other, his anger growing with each unanswered question. Employees lowered their eyes when he passed, no one daring to speak. For years, Byru had believed he was the one carrying the empire. He thought Omi was only helping here and there, filling small gaps. But that morning revealed the truth. She had been the center, the anchor, the quiet force behind every success. And now, without her, everything was slipping like sand through his fingers. He sat again in his office, the papers surrounding him like a storm. Calls kept ringing, problems kept rising, and for the first time there was no Omi to fix them. He thought about her words. Thanks for nothing. He had thrown them at her like poison, not realizing that the nothing he mocked was the very reason he had everything. The shock was not just that she had resigned. The real shock was the emptiness she left behind, an emptiness so wide he could not fill it. And as the office buzzed with confusion, Byru finally felt the truth sink into his chest. Omi was gone. And with her, the foundation of his empire had gone. 2 days passed, then weeks, and the cracks in Byru's empire began to show. At first he believed it was only temporary. He told himself the company would adjust, that business would go on without Omi. But the truth revealed itself faster than he expected. Clients who had once trusted him refused to sign deals without Omi's presence. They had relied on her calm voice, her steady confidence, the way she explained every detail until they felt safe. Without her, meetings ended in silence and hesitation. Promises that once turned into contracts slipped away like water through open hands. The suppliers followed next. Bills that Omi had always managed quietly began to arrive. She had been the one balancing the accounts, smoothing over delays, keeping relationships steady. Now angry voices filled his phone, demanding back payments and threatening to cut ties. Byru tried to explain, tried to bluff his way through, but no one trusted him the way they trusted her. Inside the office, his employees began to lose patience. They had always respected Omi, not only for her work but for the way she treated them with kindness. She listened to their problems, encouraged them, made them feel like part of something bigger. Byru, on the other hand, barked orders and took credit for their efforts. With Omi gone, their loyalty crumbled. One by one, they began to leave, taking their skills and their respect with them. Empty desks filled the office, and the sound of unanswered phones grew heavier each day. Byru sat in his office surrounded by chaos. Papers piled high, phones ringing with demands he could not meet, and his once booming company began to look like a sinking ship. Every corner reminded him of Omi, her desk where she used to sit, the files she kept neatly organized, the calm presence that had made the place feel alive. Now it felt hollow, like a shell stripped of its soul. The debts grew, the calls increased, and his pride no longer had strength to cover the truth. He was drowning, and the empire he had bragged about to the world was collapsing before his eyes. The more he tried to control it, the faster it slipped away. He remembered the message he had sent her. "Thanks for nothing." Those words echoed louder now, mocking him. Because it was that nothing that had built everything he was losing. Late at night, he sat alone at his desk, staring at the empty chair where Omi once worked. He thought of her sacrifices, her loyalty, her endless patience. He had dismissed her, treated her as invisible, only to realize too late that she had been the foundation of everything. Now the empire was gone, the people were gone, and he was left with nothing but debts, silence, and regret. While Byru's world was falling apart, Omi's life was taking a different turn. She did not break down the way many expected. She had cried enough silent tears in the past, but now she refused to let grief consume her. Instead, she chose peace in the smallest things. In the early mornings, when the village was still quiet, she walked by the river. The gentle water calmed her heart, and for the first time in years, she breathed without carrying anyone else's weight. At home, she filled her days with simple joys. She braided her niece's hair while listening to her childish laughter, and it reminded her of the innocence she once had before her life became a shadow of sacrifice. She cooked meals not because she was waiting for someone to come home, but because she enjoyed the taste herself. She sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sun dip low, feeling a freedom she had never known as a wife who constantly waited for footsteps that never came. Her nights became different too. For years she had slept lightly, always waking at the sound of a door opening, hoping Byru was finally home. Now she slept peacefully through the night. No waiting. No disappointment. The quietness that once felt like loneliness began to feel like comfort. As days passed, Omi began to look ahead. She didn't waste her time planning revenge or trying to prove a point. She didn't dream of starting a rival empire just to make Byru jealous. She knew bitterness would only chain her again. Instead, she started drafting her own plans, writing small ideas in a notebook she kept by her bed. These ideas were not about him, not about saving anyone else, but about her future. She thought of the skills she had gained, the countless proposals she had written, the negotiations she had handled. All those years of silent work had given her strength and wisdom, even if Byru never admitted it. Now she decided to use those skills for herself. She began outlining business ideas that were simple but honest, things that reflected her own heart. For once, she was not building for him, not carrying his empire, not waiting for his recognition. She was building for Omi. Her family noticed the change. The heaviness that once lived in her eyes started to lift. She smiled more often, not forced but real. She smiled more often, not forced but real. She laughed with children, shared stories with neighbors, and rediscovered parts of herself she thought were gone forever. This was not a loud rebirth. It wasn't marked by wealth or attention. It was quiet, steady, and real. It was the life of a woman who had been broken down but had chosen to rise again, not to prove anything to the man who failed her, but to honor herself. For the first time in her life, Omi was free, and that freedom was more powerful than any empire she had once carried. The market was busy that evening, filled with voices of sellers calling out their prices and women bargaining over vegetables. Omi had gone there with her basket to buy fruits and a little rice. She walked through the rows, choosing carefully, enjoying the simple peace of the place. Her life had become quieter now, and she found comfort in these small errands. But then, as she reached the corner where the yam sellers sat, she froze. There, standing in front of a stall, was Byru. For a moment her heart skipped, not out of love but out of shock. He was not the man she remembered. His once polished shoes were dusty, his shirt wrinkled, and his hair uncombed. The man who used to carry himself like a king now looked like a shadow of his former self. He held a small basket with only a few cheap goods inside. Just some onions, pepper, and a loaf of bread. His hands shook slightly as if even carrying that was too heavy for him. Byru noticed her. His eyes widened and he quickly tried to straighten his back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his face. "Omi, let's talk," he muttered, his voice low, almost broken. He tried to sound like the proud man she once knew, but the cracks were too clear. The strength he used to carry in his words was gone. Omi stood still, looking at him. For a moment, her mind went back to the early days when he would walk into their home with confidence, dressed in fine clothes, giving orders like he ruled the world. But now, all she saw was a man broken by his own pride. His empire had collapsed not because of enemies, but because he had pushed away the one person who had always held it together. The market carried on around them. Children ran past, laughing, and women continued haggling loudly. But for Omi, it felt like everything had gone quiet. She saw him, really saw him, and realized something. This was no longer her husband. This was just a man who had set fire to his own life and now stood in the ashes. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than words. Byru lowered his eyes, unable to hold her gaze. The proud man now reduced to begging for a moment of her time. Omi took a breath, lifted her basket and walked away. She didn't hurry, she didn't look back. She just walked on, steady and calm, carrying the quiet dignity he had once tried to take from her. Behind her, Byru stood frozen in the crowd, clutching his small basket like it was all he had left. And maybe it was, because the woman who had built his world had finally walked past him, leaving him to face the ruins he created. Byru's voice shook as he stood in front of Omi, his pride stripped away like old paint from a wall. He tried to hold himself together, but the weight of his own mistakes pressed hard on his chest. His eyes, once so full of arrogance, now carried a deep shame that even he couldn't hide. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the shore, desperate, helpless, and terrified of being left behind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavier than all the years they had shared. Then at last Byru opened his mouth, and words tumbled out, words he had never thought he would say. "Omi, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. All of it, the affairs, the lies, the way I treated you. I destroyed everything we built together. You were the reason I ever succeeded. You were my strength. You were the one who carried me when I thought I was carrying you." His face crumbled as he admitted what had been locked inside him for years. He had called himself the man of the house, the leader, the achiever, but standing there now, he finally confessed the truth, that it had always been Omi who held the family together, Omi who gave him the power to stand tall. He took a shaky breath and said the words she had once dreamed of hearing, the words that would have healed her heart if they had come years earlier. "I can't do this without you," he muttered, his voice almost breaking. "I need you, Omi. Please come back." His shoulders trembled, and for the first time in his life, the proud Byru bowed his head, ashamed of the man he had become. But Omi didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She simply looked at him with steady eyes, her face calm, her heart no longer tied to his storm. The pain he had given her had already turned into something else, strength, freedom, and peace. She had waited for these words once. She had prayed for them in the quiet nights, hoping that someday he would finally see her worth. But now, hearing them at last, she felt nothing. No joy, no victory, no rush of love. Just clarity. She let out a slow breath, her voice clear and steady as she spoke the only truth he needed to hear. "You already did this without me," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You made your choice when you pushed me away. And now, Byru, you must live with that choice." Her words hung in the air like a final curtain falling on a play. Byru's lips parted but no sound came. He had begged, confessed, and surrendered, but nothing could undo the years of damage. Omi turned away, leaving him standing in the weight of the words he could never swallow. Omi stepped out of the office building one last time, the sunlight warm on her face. She didn't glance back at the desks, the papers, or the empty chairs where she had spent years holding everything together. She didn't return to Byru, didn't try to fix what he had broken, and didn't let the past chain her to a life of pain. Instead, she walked forward slowly, steadily, carrying only her dignity and a strength that no one could ever take from her. Every step she took felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of years of sacrifice and betrayal was finally falling away behind her. She passed familiar streets, noticing things she hadn't before, The laughter of children running past, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the chatter of neighbors. It all felt alive in a way it hadn't when her heart was heavy with someone else's mistakes. She realized she didn't need approval, validation, or love from the man who had dismissed her. She had built herself quietly while he floundered, and now she could simply be herself, whole and unshaken. Byru, on the other hand, remained trapped in the silence of his empty office. The phones that used to ring with clients' requests stayed quiet, the papers on his desk seemed heavier than ever, and the absence of Omi echoed louder than any words he could speak. He sat staring at the spot where her chair had always been, the place that had held the backbone of his success. Slowly, he understood the truth he had long refused to see. The woman he had called nothing had been the very reason he had everything. He thought of all the times he had ignored her sacrifices, dismissed her efforts, and taken her loyalty for granted. He remembered the cruel message he had sent her, the text that had burned in her heart, and he realized there was no undoing it. Nothing he said or did now could bring back what he had lost. She had already chosen a different path, one where he had no place, and he was left alone with the bitter taste of regret. Omi didn't look back. She didn't need to. The life ahead was hers to shape, free from lies, betrayals, and the weight of someone else's pride. Her past with Byru was a lesson, a memory of strength that had carried her through the hardest nights. With each step, she felt lighter, more alive, more herself than ever before. By the time she disappeared from sight, Byru was still sitting in his office, silent and empty. The realization settled in him like a cold truth he couldn't escape. The woman he had once dismissed as nothing had always been his everything. And now she belonged to no one but herself. Omi had walked away whole, unbroken, and finally free. If you were inspired by Omi's strength and courage, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life tales of resilience and empowerment. Don't forget to comment below. Would you have walked away like Omi or stayed? Your story matters too.